Welcome to Garden Success with Skip Richter, the show designed to help you have a bountiful garden and a beautiful landscape. Call in now with your lawn and garden questions at 979-845-5689 or email your questions to gardensuccess@tamu.edu. And now, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter.
Well, hello, and thanks for listening today. We always are glad to have you here. Normally, we're a call-in show, but today we're coming to you by tape. We got a really good show today, by the way. And so don't try to call in, but we will be back live again next week. Today, we are fortunate to have Dr. Sam Feagley. Sam is a retired state soil environmental specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. And it's always special to be able to get Sam to come back out of retirement for a moment just to talk to us and bring his years of wisdom on soils and the many things he's seen and experienced and done. Sam, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Skip. Appreciate being given the opportunity to be here again.
Well, good. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got here. I always like for folks to know who it is that they're listening to.
Well, I was raised on a farm up on the high plains in Bailey County. Got 2 degrees from A&M, one in chemistry and one in soil fertility. Then went to the University of Missouri, got a PhD in soil chemistry. So I'm a soil chemist by training. Done a lot of soil fertility work as well.
Oh, good.
Worked for 16 years at LSU in their agronomy department, and then got the opportunity to come back to A&M in 95 and with Extension. And then also got an opportunity in 2005 to also start doing a little bit of teaching again.
Oh, boy.
So had lots of opportunities to see a lot of different soil chemistry and soil fertility issues here in the state of Texas. Since I was a state specialist, got to see a lot of the state with all kinds of different issues.
Yeah. Well, I know some people, may hear that, well, we're going to talk about soils, and it's like, oh, man, let's talk about tomatoes and flowers and all that. Well, you don't have tomatoes and flowers without soil, and I often tell gardeners that by the time you put a seed or transplant in the ground, you are about 80% of the way to success or failure, because you've either chosen something that wants to grow there. It's like a blue spruce from Colorado. You're probably not going to do real well. You've picked a spot that's sunny or shady, that's well drained or poorly drained, that has a good nutrient balance in the soil or is way off, and the plant has some pretty strong opinions about all those things. And so when you walk off from planting, there's a lot we do after that, of course, watering and maybe fertilizing and things, but the soil is literally the foundation, and it pretty much sets the stage for success or failure. So
yes, sir.
That's why we're spending some time today in soils, and that's why I think it's so important. I guess I never tried to do it on a percentage basis, but a huge number of the problems that I run into as a county extension agent have their root, if you will, in the soil.
No pun intended.
They are rooted in the soil. That's where the problem began. So let's get into it and start talking about that. I guess most people have a lawn. That's just part of having a place in Texas, I think, is you got to have a lawn. And I notice in the spring sometimes our grass gets a yellowing that's when I look at it, it looks like an iron deficiency, and then it kind of greens up. And then I noticed that this summer, of course, we went through a really rough drought, and when we got some rain again, here comes some more of that yellowing. And what's going on there? If we have an iron deficiency and we didn't add iron, why suddenly do we not have an iron deficiency?
Well, I think we got 2 different issues there.
Okay.
I think the one in the spring may be iron. I think the one in the fall was probably sodium.
Sodium. Okay.
And so with the spring, or in the spring, iron and also phosphorus have a kind of a temperature effect on them, and as far as plants are concerned. And so sometimes early in the spring we will see plants that have purpling on their leaves, and that's a phosphorus deficiency.
Okay.
Which means we were marginal on phosphorus.
Oh, okay.
And we probably need to put a little bit of phosphorus out, but we need to know basically what it is,
right? How
much,
right.
From a soil test, not just guessing at it. And then with the iron, if we've been watering quite a bit, the sodium has also caused the pH of the soil to actually increase.
The sodium in the water we're watering with.
Right. Yes, sir. And so when that happens, we have the potential for especially the iron deficiencies.
Okay.
Even if we may have enough in the soil, but because we've got that elevated pH, usually above 7.5, that we may get some issues there. There's many times what will also go ahead and happen is that temperature, as the soil warms back up, then we will get some remediation of that.
Okay.
We normally don't recommend the application of iron.
Okay.
In most cases. It gets tied up in the soil so rapidly because of the reactions that it has with all the different kinds of soil minerals. We can get some reaction from foliar applications sometimes, but iron's a tricky one to try to remediate.
Okay.
I think what we're seeing now with the yellowing of our plants, I think it's more because of the sodium that we have applied through the 2.5 months of summer,
Right.
when most people were overwatering.
Yes.
And there's a couple of things that if you have applied a lot of water and you see that yellowing in your grass now, especially, it may be nitrogen, but it may also be coming from sodium as well.
Okay.
Again, soil test is critical for that, because if the sodium has built up in your soil, then you may have some very high pHs, and it may drive it to as much as 9.
Yeah.
If we've been putting on too much. And then you really got some
That's
iron and potential zinc issues.
I've kind of wondered too if in the drought and the soil gets dry, the root, especially the tender root tips, could die back, and the root tip is where iron is taken up, right? And so some of that could be maybe a drought response, and now you're watering, but it takes a minute to reestablish a good root system. Could that be a factor?
That makes sense. Yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense.
Well, let's talk about this.
Well, I got one more.
Okay.
Back to the sodium. On the sodium, again, with a soil test, you'll get the information from a standpoint if there's an issue with it. If there is, then the remediation for it is the application of gypsum.
Okay.
And the soil testing laboratory won't necessarily give you a recommendation for gypsum, but you can call them and ask them, based on my sodium concentration, how much gypsum, should I apply to do the remediation?
Okay.
And it is a slow process.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Okay. This is going to take months.
Okay.
For that remediation to occur, because gypsum's it's fairly soluble, but it doesn't move in the soil real fast. And so what has to happen is the calcium that's in the gypsum will replace the sodium, and then through hopefully rainfall, that sodium actually gets leached out of the rooting zone over a period of time. But I've seen it take 1-2 years for some people to get some remediation. I've seen others take only a couple of months.
Okay.
One thing that you can look for to get an indication if you've got some sodium issues, if you have sidewalks around, especially close to your grass, when it rains, if you see some blackening on your sidewalks.
It's kind of almost a goo coming out of off the soil.
Yeah, that is an indication that you've got some high sodium. The sodium is actually dissolving your organic matter.
Okay.
And that's running off your soil. And so whenever you start seeing those kinds of things, you're probably having issues getting water into your soil as well. And that's the primary thing that sodium is so detrimental to soils.
Well, there is a lot of good information in that, what you just said, because people that have lawns just love to overwater them. And, I lived in Houston prior to moving back to the mothership here, and it rains like crazy down there. I mean, you almost don't need to water your lawn ever down there, really. And I had a neighbor whose sprinkler comes on almost every day. It may have been every day. And the heads were so misaligned, by the way, that they sprayed my car in my driveway. And so I parked backwards on some days so I could wash the other side. But, he just water. Well, they don't have a sodium problem down there. And by the way, they still sell gypsum in the garden centers, even though nobody really needs gypsum in most of Houston. But that's another story. The fact that we overwater our lawns and we're using a water that has so much sodium in it, it just what is here. It's just another reason not to waste water.
Exactly.
And in another sense, and you alluded to this, the more we do that and create a soil that is so tight that the infiltration slows down, now watering becomes a little more of a challenge when you really need to water. So it's like people talk about a win-win situation. It's a lose-lose-lose situation. And so I think if people in the Bryan College Station area, especially this whole region, could think about that, it would also help them back off of wasting drinking water that they've paid for.
And that's critical for us. I mean, that we have a limited, people think we've got unlimited supply of drinking water, but we don't. It's a very small amount of the total amount of water that we have on this earth.
A very small
and
amount.
So it is, and it will continue to get more and more critical from the standpoint of having what we call potable water we can use easily. Yeah. Now, we can take the salt out of the ocean water. Sure we can. And we got plenty of water out there.
Get out your checkbook.
But it costs a whole lot of money to do that kind of stuff. And so we need to really conserve the good water that we do have.
Well, we do, and so now we're talking about, you're paying for it, and now it's not an unlimited supply, and more people are moving here, so it's not going to get better. And then on top of it all, it's messing your soil up if you overdo it. Why waste it?
Yes, sir.
So I guess I don't know what else to say. It seems like that's enough reason right there to stop it. But I appreciate that comments about sodium, because it is an issue that we do deal with. And you mentioned the calcium and the sodium. Calcium helps replace the sodium on the soil particles so it can be washed away slowly over time. Let's talk a little bit about evaluating your soil, looking at the soil you have, and I'd like you to talk first a little bit about soil testing. How would someone go about that? How should they go about it? And, when you get to the lab, there's a number of different options. There's a regular analysis, and then you can get micros. And I won't start answering your question. I'll just leave that now with you. What would you recommend?
Well, the first thing is you got to take a representative sample. And so you have to realize that in your yard, you have multiple ways that you take care of that soil. Your flower bed, you do some things too that are different from what you do in the lawn. If you have a garden, you treat it differently than what you do the other two. And so you want a representative sample from each of those different groups, okay? And you, by representative sample, I'm talking about multiple subsamples that would be mixed together to represent that one area. So like a lawn.
Subsamples, not subsoil, but
subsamples.
Okay.
And so our soil testing laboratory here at A&M makes the recommendations on the top 6 inches. Well, we got to figure out what the top 6 inches are. And so if you have very much organic material on top, like a thatch in your lawn, or if you have mulch in flower beds or garden, you want to take that part off that you can tell what it is. Once it gets decomposed enough to where you can't tell what that organic material is, then that's the top of your soil. Okay. So we take that down to 6 inches.
An equal amount from the top inch as you get from each inch going down to 6.
And so we want you to take, say for instance in a lawn, most of our lawns in town will be larger in the front lawn. The side lawns are going to be very small, and in the back lawn may be bigger or smaller. So in the bigger part of your lawn, you want to take like 3 or 4 samples. On each side, you'll take 1 subsample. And then in the smaller part, you'll take another 2 or 3 subsamples. So it comes out to be about 10 subsamples, 8 to 10 subsamples that you'll take.
Okay.
Put that in, how do you take the sample? Well, most of us are not going to have push probes or anything like that, so we're going to be using a shovel.
Okay.
So you're going to dig a hole that's about 8 inches deep, and you're going to dig it deep, wide enough that you can take a 1-inch slice on one side, lay the shovel back, all the way back, and not touch the other side of the hole. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take wherever the top of the soil is after you determine it, you're going to take a 1-inch slice right out of the middle of that that you took.
Yeah.
Okay. So you take the top part off, you take the bottom part off down to 6 inches, and then you take that 1-inch slice out. You take that 1-inch slice and put it into a clean plastic bucket. You're taking the soil sample with a clean shovel, not rusted shovel.
Okay.
Okay, because if you do micros, then you've just contaminated it with iron and some other things.
Right.
So now we got the subsamples.
I'm not sure I have a not rusted shovel, Sam. Go ahead.
Clean it with a...
Okay, I will.
And take those subsamples, mix them together very well, and then you want to put that, we have the soil testing laboratory. If you can go to those or through the county agents, you can get soil sample bags for the soil testing laboratory, or use Ziploc sandwich bags. Okay, I tell people to double bag them, just because sometimes there's a pebble or something like that in there, and it can tears the bag, and then you know your sample's all over the place rather than in the bag.
How much soil?
You need that Ziploc sandwich bag 2/3 full.
Okay.
On the soil testing bags that we have, there is a mark. That's a fill line, and so you want to make for sure that you get your sample.
It amounts to about 2 cups, or how much?
Probably pretty close to that.
Pretty close. Okay.
Pretty close to that.
All right.
And so now you mark it, label it well. I usually put a piece of paper with a permanent marking pen with that information on inside, and then I also mark it on the outside. And then that way there's 2 places. Hopefully I don't lose them both.
Okay.
And so now we've got a sample for the flower bed. We've got a sample for the garden. We've got a sample for the lawn. If you have fruit trees, you need another sample.
Okay.
Okay. So you're sampling all those different places that you're going to treat the soils differently.
Right.
Ship those to the soil testing laboratory as soon as you collect the sample. Don't throw them in the back of the pickup or in the trunk of the car and drive around for the next 2-3 weeks, because that changes your soil sample.
Okay.
You want to ship it just as quick as you can. And if you live in this area, you can take it over to the soil testing laboratory, because it's it's on F&B Road.
Yeah, behind those big oil tanks off Wellburn, just north of campus. That's kind of the fast, easy way to get.
So very easy to take it to them and everything. My suggestion is that you do the routine analysis first. The routine analysis is going to give you pH, so the acidity or basicity of your sample, electrical conductivity, which is how salty it may be, then nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium,
I think sulfur,
sodium, and sulfur.
Yeah.
Your sample comes back and it has a pH over 7.5. The next time you take your soil samples, then do routine plus micros.
Okay.
The micros adds iron, manganese, zinc, and copper to the analysis. How often should you take your soil samples? I usually tell people for the first probably 2 to 3 years, take one on a yearly basis. That gives you a kind of a baseline, okay? And then after that, about every 3 years.
Okay.
Because if you really look at how we treat our soils around our homes and things like that, we don't change it very often.
Right.
In fact, most of the nutrients we put back into the soil because we mulch the lawns.
Return clippings.
We return the clippings in our flower beds, our gardens. So we don't change those nutrient levels very much. And so if you get if you from year to year your soil test analysis comes back really close to the same thing, it's okay.
That's good.
Because that's about what it's supposed to do,
Okay.
because you're recycling those nutrients.
Okay. Well, and soil testing, I think you had a kind of a recipe if you're going to bring in a soil or a soil mix, for like someone's going to go out and they're going to buy something from a lot where they're got big piles of soil and things.
Right.
Would you talk a little bit about that? How would someone unofficially, kind of assess what they're looking at?
Well, many of those that the ones that I have seen analysis on over the years, most of them are very high in nutrient content to begin with. And so we'll start with how to choose what you want to put out there. And so what I normally would tell people to do is to go in there and look at the different materials. Many times they'll have manures in them, and so you'll have the odor.
Or mushroom compost.
Or mushroom compost. So you'll have some odors associated with them. And so the next thing to do is to feel of them. If they feel like sandpaper, real gritty, they're probably going to be high in sands.
Okay.
If you rub them together and they feel almost like talcum powder, then they probably have quite a bit of silt in them, and that can be an issue we'll talk about in just a second. And then the ones that will probably work good have a little bit of grit and a little bit of softness to them, but don't have anything that's a real hard clump. That's the clays.
Okay.
So if you've got some little particles, but you can't break those little squares apart, there may be a lot of clay in there somewhere.
Clay. Or if it's wet and it just slips off like grease, that's probably a clay.
Yeah. So now what you want to do is before you go, you always want to take a little test kit with you. And that little test kit's going to be a clear plastic cup, paper, filter paper for coffee, and then a bottle of water.
All right.
And so you're going to fill your cup with the one that you think you want to buy. You're going to fill it about half full with that material. And you're going to tap it down to simulate settling, because they will settle. And then the next thing, you're going to take that coffee filter and put it down on the surface of the soil and kind of mash it in. And then you're going to take your water and put about half as much water in there as you have soil. And then you want to watch what happens to that wetting front, where the water moves. Okay, if it goes straight through and it's to the bottom before you even blink your eyes, that's not going to hold water. And so if you build a raised flower bed, you get a rainfall event and it goes out the bottom. Well, the second thing is, if it's real silty, sometimes that silt will set up just like concrete. And so many times whenever you're adding that water, it'll just kind of sit there and won't move hardly at all. The kind that you're looking for, you can actually see the wetting front move, but it's moving slowly through the soil. And that's the one that you want to purchase.
Okay.
And then once you've made that decision, you also want to take a soil sample. And you want to send that to the soil testing laboratory, again, because many times the nutrient level in those materials is going to be very high, and high enough that you may never have to apply anything with the exception of some nitrogen over a period of time.
Okay. All right. Well, that's some good advice. I know that the soil mixes can vary quite a bit, and depending on the parent material that they came from. And often things called topsoil are not topsoil. They're
whatever's on top, whatever's
on top of the soil, which
of that geologic material after they've got through scraping it.
Right. Well, speaking of whatever's on top of the soil, a lot of times when you build a new neighborhood, the builders go in and their concern is, I want to put a nice solid concrete pad on the ground and I don't want it to move around. And so there's a lot of bulldozing and scraping and leveling and piling up and everything. And our soil profiles just get turned all over the place. And then sometimes stuff gets brought in from outside the area. And would you comment on that a little bit? And maybe in a way that a homeowner is going, okay, so now what do I do about that? Yeah. I'm in that situation. But why is that a problem?
Well, many times one of the things that they use is called they call it red dirt, or at least that's what I've heard them call it. I've been told by several people that use it that it'll grow anything. Well, I have personal experience that shows that it doesn't grow anything. So It's a difficult material to work with. It does set up hard, and so you have to do some amending to it. One of the things is to bring it before you put your lawn down, if you can, or flower beds or anything like that, is go ahead and haul in some material that you have diligently decided that this is a material that I want to use, and then mix it in with that red dirt. Okay, and that usually takes care of the potential issues with it. If your lawn's already established, you go out and you collect a soil sample in the lawn, flower bed, and things like that, and you notice that you got this nice red material in there that around here doesn't belong, or at least over in this part of the county. You get over to Brazos, you got a different story. But in this area, we typically don't have real red soils. Then probably the best thing is to add a little bit of organic matter over a period of time, slowly and gently, so that you don't over apply nutrients, because most of what you're going to be using is what we'd consider to be soil amendments, not an actual fertilizer. Aeration, if you can aerate your lawns especially, then that's a possibility to help, because that helps to get things in those holes that kind of mixes.
Yeah, if you aerate and then spread a little top dressing over it,
then that helps. Yeah. That helps.
Okay.
So it's more of a difficult thing to fix if you've already got your vegetation in there, as compared to if they put it out and you can get some remediation done before the plants are actually in.
So let's see, where do I want to go with this? I think that there's a lot of misconception of what nutrients plants need and what amounts. And when I was starting off my career, it seemed like triple 10 and triple 13, 10, 20, 10 were really common recommendations. Now, fortunately, they're not. And so why is that? Why does a plant need as much nitrogen, as phosphorus, as potassium? And why wouldn't we just give an even amount so we have I'll say balanced soil, because we put the same amount of nutrients on it?
Well, as a rule of thumb, the nitrogen is typically in a plant, and what a plant requires is usually going to be somewhere between 3 and 4 times what the phosphorus is.
Okay.
As P2O5, as percent nitrogen. And then the potassium can be 2 to 4%.
2 to 4 times.
2 to 4 times, excuse me.
Of the phosphorus.
of the phosphorus. Yeah. And so it's quite similar to nitrogen.
Okay.
So as a rule of thumb, we a lot of times we'll talk about a 4:1:3, 4:1:2 ratio of percent nitrogen to percent P2O5 to percent K2O. That's if you're starting from zero. Okay.
Right.
One of the things that has happened over the years is that phosphorus has become an issue in some cases from a water quality standpoint. And so if we're always putting out the same amount of phosphorus as we're putting out nitrogen, we're putting out way too much phosphorus. And every one of us homeowners can raise their hand and say, okay, we've done that before. We've contributed to surface water quality issues in our area.
Phosphorus is a big deal when it moves off site like that.
We've always had plenty of nitrogen in our surface water bodies to cause algal blooms, but the key issue has been phosphorus. And so because of dead and decaying vegetation, that phosphorus coming off of that, over application of it from a nutrient standpoint, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's an organic source or an inorganic source. Over application of phosphorus has contributed to that issue as well. And so what it does is it speeds up a process called eutrophication. Eutrophication is basically the weathering process of a surface water body. Well, when we add other things that speed that process up, like we have with phosphorus in some places, then we get the algal blooms, we get the low dissolved oxygens in those water bodies. We end up with nasty, stinky water, and if it goes far enough, then we also get the fish kills.
Yeah, the dead zones where rivers pour out into the Gulf and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Let's talk about this a little bit more. Another thing I've noticed is, I say I've noticed, it's just a chemical fact that when you put all these nutrients on the surface of your lawn, we're assuming this isn't a rototilled garden, you put them on the surface year after year. If I'm not mistaken, you could come back 5 years later and 10 years later, and almost all the phosphorus you put on the ground is in the top inch or so. It's primarily right up there at the top, whereas, of course, nitrogen washes. It's very easily moved. And potassium pretty well. Not as much as nitrogen, but more than phosphorus, maybe. And so now we're creating in this zone up at the top an excessive amount of phosphorus. That's another reason why like a triple 13 would become a problem pretty quick.
Yeah, unless you need it.
Unless you need it.
Unless you need it. My soil test, we moved into our home in 1995. I take soil test about every 3 years. And when I'm still using triple 13 because my soil has not changed.
You still need phosphorus.
I still need all three of them at about the same amount. And that's what the recommendation comes back as, and so
that's interesting. Well, I have phosphorus, because there may be a lot there, but that doesn't mean there's a lot available. That's another factor that you can have a significant. In fact, you want to have a significant amount because only some of it is going to be available each year. But Sam, when I was in Travis County years ago as a county extension agent, we did a study for the water quality part of the city of Austin in northwest Austin, and we sampled 200 homes, the yard sample. You were part of that, and not one needed phosphorus out of 200. And when you looked at, and the recommendation, the way they analyzed it changed, so the numbers you were looking for changed. But at that time, I think it was like once you get past 20 or something, or 60, it was enough phosphorus. Was it 60? We had yards that were 200. And so you put in your will for your great grandchildren to not add any phosphorus to the lawn, and that really made an impact, because that was a clay soil also, a black clay, and we can easily get in that situation here. So just something else to think about. Yeah. And then when we return,
and then what ends up happening is that because it's sitting right on the surface, we always have soil erosion. I don't care how thick our soils, our vegetation is. You can look. After a rain, go out and just get a scoop of the water that's running off of your lawn or down the gutter, and just let it sit. And you'll see within a couple of hours, if not quicker, you'll see sediment down at the bottom of it, and it looked like it was clear water coming off. So that's where the phosphorus is getting into our surface water bodies, because it's coming off of our properties.
Well, and the saying that all land drains to some body of water, whether it's an underground aquifer, a stream, a lake. So everyone listening to this program, go stand in your yard, and where you're standing drains to some body of water. Right. And in the watershed protection program I was working with in Austin, they used to say, "You dump it, you drink it," because it went into the Edwards Aquifer there
quickly.
And so, or you dump it, you swim in it, may be another good way to put it. All right, well, I think we've covered the phosphorus pretty well on that. One of my pet peeves when I go into the garden centers is to see fertilizers sold for a particular plant. Maybe it's a rose food, or maybe it's a citrus food, or maybe it's a tomato food. Will you comment about that a little bit? And what are they doing there, and why might a tomato food not be the best thing for your tomatoes?
Well, again, most of those are based upon not having nutrients in your soil, and so some of it those ratios are based on some science.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know whether all of it is or not, but some of it is based on on science. And so if we're dealing with a potted plant,
Mm-hmm.
that might be okay.
Because you got a confined root system.
Right,
And,
right.
Store-bought soil.
Yeah, and it's not soil.
Yeah, okay, media.
Media, yeah, plant media.
I always have to remember when I think about it, I get paranoid because this radio show, I'm having entomologists, plant pathologists, soil scientists, horticulture PhDs that potentially could hear what I say, and so it's kind of like, I don't know if I can say anything.
You do a great job.
So go ahead.
Anyway, again, from a standpoint of if they're in potting mixes, then those are probably sufficient,
Mm-hmm.
are probably good for the plants.
Okay.
In other words, but like I said, the roots are constrained. We have water's basically constrained for them and everything, and those nutrients. If there's excess nutrients, they're really not going anywhere. Whereas if we have a garden and we have a row of tomatoes and we put that on that row of tomatoes, more than likely that's not what that tomato really needs.
Mm-hmm.
I always ask, when I do the Master Gardener programs for several counties, I always ask the students, I says, how many of you have grown tomato trees? And you see these hands kind of creep up and say, I have. And, it's too much nitrogen.
Yeah.
And, plants are kind of like we are.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody's going to spoon feed you everything you need, you're not going to pick up the spoon to feed yourself.
Right.
And we get fat and sassy.
Right.
Well, that's what happens to a plant, too.
Okay.
They
you don't
don't
have to get personal with this.
Yeah. They don't get to the point where they realize, I got to reproduce.
Right.
And so sometimes we have to put them under some kind of stress to get them to go ahead and set fruit and things like that.
Well, and that also goes back to our soil testing, because an analogy I like to use for this when I'm talking to volunteers, master gardeners, and the public is it's like if you're baking a cake. And Sam, if you were decided you're going to bake a cake and you got about half of your stuff put together for the cake, and you call up and say, do I need to add sugar or salt or baking powder? How is anybody going to answer that question? Because they don't know what you've put in the bowl yet. Mm-hmm. And our soils are that way, right? And we say 3-1-2 or 4-1-2 lawn fertilizer, but not if potassium is already off the chart or phosphorus is, whatever. And so those products are, yes, they're scientifically, maybe, hopefully, set to fit what that plant is most likely going to need a boost of, but it doesn't look at what's in your soil. And so it may be the worst thing in the world to put on. A tomato food may be the worst thing to put on tomatoes, or a citrus food may be the worst thing to put on citrus, based on your soil. So that takes us back to what? Have your soil tested and know what you're beginning with, and work with the soil test lab and your county extension office, and let us get your soil to the best spot. Right. I've had a lot of gardens as I've moved around, and I found that as I am adding compost and am doing things to the soil, it ends up being something that, like you said, all it needs is a little bit of nitrogen here and there, because that's such a volatile element. In fact, I almost ignore the nitrogen on the soil test form when it comes in, because it can be really low, but that's not a problem. We can fix that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's what we want it to be.
Yeah.
When you send in a soil sample, we want your nitrogen to be testing out at 1, because what that does is it tells us as soil scientists that your plant, we hope, your plant has taken up all that nitrogen that you applied in the growing during that year.
Okay.
Whereas if you still have some left over, you over-applied it. And so we want that to be 1, basically 1.
Right.
When the soil test is done, and then we can give you a recommendation to grow the plant that you want to try to grow. And there's some plants that, it doesn't take but just a little bit of nitrogen to make a huge difference.
Yes.
And a lot of our natives are that way. Many of our fruits are that way.
The legumes that we plant.
Many of our fruits are that way as well. So, if you put out too much, then you don't get the results that you would really like to be getting.
But boy, they sure grow fast.
Yeah, and they look pretty.
That's right. Well, that's good advice. I appreciate that. So we're talking about these special soil tests and what your soil most needs. I think another thing I want to point out is, and this happened, I don't know how many years ago, but not too long ago, they created the urban soil test form. So there used to just be a soil test form. Well, now if you've got a pasture Bermuda grass for the cattle or a cotton field, that's a different test than the urban. And on the urban one, well, it's a different
form. It's a different
form, and it gives you results based on different goals.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So on the urban form, it'll say like roses or vegetables or something like that. And so I encourage home gardeners to use the urban soil test form.
Right.
And I know when you see it, you think, I live in Beedies. Why do I need urban soil test? This is not an urban area.
Yeah.
But urban just means in your yard horticulture. Yeah, you live in town.
Yeah. Or it's around your home.
Right.
It's not an agricultural field.
Yeah.
Whereas the other one's really geared to the agricultural field.
And I think you were about to correct me on this, but they test the soil the same.
Exactly.
It's just that when they give you your results, they know you're not growing an acre of cotton. You're growing a row of tomatoes.
And even if you use that other form, and if you specify that it's my lawn, my garden, whatever, you'll get your results. Recommendations back in pounds per 1,000 square feet.
Okay.
Not pounds per acre.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Whereas from an agriculture standpoint, if you said coastal Bermuda grass, then you get pounds per acre.
Yeah. Okay.
So you can use that one for both ways, but you get more plant options with the urban one for around our homes.
Good. Well, I would also like to talk about the organic fertilizers and amendments, and I want to take those separately initially here. A lot of people are interested in gardening organically. They would like to for various reasons. Some reasonable, some probably misguided in terms of what certain things will do toward our health. But talk a little bit about what are some characteristics of an organic fertilizer as opposed to a synthetic fertilizer. What are some things you need to be aware of, or maybe even down to economics and things?
Okay. Well, the first thing is, in order for it to be a fertilizer, it has to have at least the 3 numbers on it. First one's a % nitrogen, second one's a % P2O5, and the third one's a % K2O. There may be others, but it'll tell you what they are. Like it may be a dash S and give you a percentage for sulfur. Okay. So the numbers for organic fertilizers are usually going to be much lower than what they are for the commercial fertilizers or the synthetic fertilizers. But those are guaranteed analysis.
And tell us why that is.
Because
I can't scoop out the rabbit pellets underneath the kid's cage and sell it as fertilizer, can I?
No.
That's against the law.
You could, but you would probably be in jail.
Well, the kids would have to visit me in jail,
Right.
which that's...
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Yeah. So it's a regulated number. And Feed and Fertilizer here on A&M campus are the ones that take care of going out and doing spot checks and also doing the analysis of those particular things, because the companies have to send those samples in to have them analyzed.
That's a good thing, because if you live in Texas and you go buy fertilizer, you know what's in it. You know the numbers represent what's in the bag.
Exactly. And so
it's not an organic or synthetic thing. It's just a fertilizer.
It's just a fertilizer, but it's got to have those 3 numbers. So the organic fertilizers, like the nitrogen, may be 5. Very seldom do you see it more than about 6 or 7. Phosphorus, maybe 1 or 2. Sometimes it'll be a little higher, especially if it's got poultry litter in it. And then the potassium. You never know where potassium is going to be. And it could be a 0. If they have less than 1% in them, many times they will be actually zeros. Now, the thing that people have to realize is that every organic source of nutrients, whether it be a fertilizer or just an amendment, has all of it in there. It may be, like I said, it may be low, and so from a guaranteed analysis, it may be less than 1, and so they list 0, but it's not 0.
Right. Well, another fact is organic is basically something that was once alive, an organic fertilizer. It may be a plant, or in case of blood meal, it was animal-based, or bone meal. But because of that, you don't just have 3 numbers.
Right.
You've got, there's going to be zinc in it. There's going to be, because for a plant to live, you got to have some zinc for that plant to have grown and lived, and you got to have some copper, and you've got to have some manganese, and so
they're all there.
You get a maybe a little better blend as you, or well, let me say it this way: you get a more different nutrients present in an organic than you would in most of the synthetics.
Yeah, most of the synthetics are not going to have all the other stuff.
Yeah.
So the next thing is, it's that nutrient is in, the majority of that nutrient is going to be in the organic form, which means it's tied up with the proteins, amino acids, that kind of stuff. And so it's not available to the plant. And so when we want to use an organic, we need to get that organic out. If it's in the spring, we want to put it out about a month before we need those nutrients.
Really? Okay. Because
what has to happen is the microorganisms, or and to a certain extent some of the macroorganisms, have to mineralize that organic source into what we call an inorganic source of those nutrients.
Right.
So nitrogen, for instance. Nitrogen is going to be tied up in the amino acids. Okay? And to get it to be available to a plant, it has to be either nitrate or ammonia. And so the microorganisms are the guys that do the majority of that for us. And so that's what it takes. Now, I'm going to go ahead and compare organics, soil amendments.
Okay, now we're shifting from fertilizer to amendments.
Right.
Okay.
So the soil amendments do not have the numbers on there, and all kinds of things. Manures are soil amendments. Okay, they're great soil amendments, but you don't know what the nutrient content that's actually in them. And so, in the state of Texas, we do not have regulations for soil amendments. Most states do. And so the best thing I can tell people is just buyer beware, because all kinds of things that cannot be sold in most other states, they market them here in Texas. And so, for lack of a better term, we do have some garbage that gets sold here.
It's the Wild West. So and also the claims that can be made.
Oh boy.
That I'm just trying to think of some of the terms that I've heard used and things, but it may be a decent thing, or it may have a benefit, that has some benefit, but oh gosh, the overselling.
I've seen some organic sources that have a list of all the elements. I mean, everything in the periodic table. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's good for the plant.
Yeah.
Even though we only have, depending on, when I took them, there were 16. Now I think there's 21, what they call essential elements, but it's not the whole periodic table.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Bioactivator. There's a good one. I was trying to think of some of those other terms that just, buyer beware.
Yeah.
But so that's not to say an amendment is bad. It's just to say an amendment is not regulated, so you have no guarantee as to what it is or is not going to contain or do.
My suggestion is that if you're looking at a particular soil amendment, find out what that soil amendment is, and then look up, Google it. And if it has research information from Extension or Experiment Station,
A tip I always give our master gardeners is put that term you're looking for in Google and then a space and say site, SITE, .edu. So it's saying, Google, I want you to look for this word or words, but I only want you to look at sites that end in .edu. And that way you get past all the I'm selling you stuff to the here's what research has
Good.
said, and
Good.
it's a good way to cut through the clutter.
Yeah, because all the places that sell it, it's the best thing since sliced bread.
No, I know. I once saw a product, and I will not tell the name, but the listeners, you probably heard of it. And there was I don't know, it looked like maybe a Eastern European woman with standing out in a field holding 2 turnips, and one looked like a radish and one looked like a basketball. And they used this on the one that became a basketball. That was the proof right there. I mean, look at that. Can you not see that did good? And so, yeah, fortunately, research is a little more diligent than that.
Exactly.
Approach. Well, good. So, talking about the organic fertilizers, I think it's also worth noting that when we were initially trying to get people to quit bagging their lawn clippings and even bagging and getting rid of leaves, we were talking about how nature works. And you go look at a beautiful forest or the giant grasslands across mid-America when the settlers were coming across, grass as deep as a horse's belly thing. Nobody was fertilizing those. Now, that's not to say we don't need fertilizer to grow things, especially if you're trying to get the most corn per acre that you can and so on. But it's just to say that those microbes are really rule the world. They're taking the leaves from the trees and the droppings from the birds flying through the forest and everything else, and they're turning it into a plant food and cycling it back so that those organic types of nutrients that we were talking about are cycled, and then they go into the plant or they go into other microbes, their bodies, and then they die and they release them back, and it's part of a cycle. And I know a lot of gardeners appreciate that natural cycle. Maybe they're not coming from a standpoint of, if I use a chemical fertilizer or a synthetic fertilizer, it's going to kill my soil kind of thing. But just from the standpoint of, I like to work, within the natural system. And that's where we get into seeing the benefits of compost and whatnot. Yeah. But from a
research standpoint, what I've seen in many cases is if we take half the nutrients that we need from an organic source and the other half from the synthetic source, that we actually get better production.
And why is that?
The synthetic is available right now, whereas the organic is a slower release, and so we get the long lasting from the organics, we get the quick reaction from the synthetics, and so if that plant needs a kickstart right now, it's got the kickstart.
You can do that.
Whereas if we're just putting out organics, it's going to be a month, 6 weeks before it's going to get any kick. And then it gets just a little kick because not all those nutrients are available at one time. They're available over a period of time.
So that's a good point. And when I'm talking to home gardeners, we're always recommending add some compost to your soil periodically. Can you talk a little bit about what is a little compost periodically? In other words, would you say that if you tilled 1 inch of compost into your vegetable garden once a year, that would be about right? I'm asking you a question that is unfair, I realize, because it's all the yeah buts that are attached to it. But is that overloading on nutrients? What do you think?
It can be.
Okay.
It can be, and I'm always going to go back to a soil test before you apply anything. And then if you don't know what the nutrient content is on your compost, get an analysis. And so the nutrient analysis or the nutrient content in your compost, what your soils need, then you can apply that compost according to what you need. Dillo dirt is a product that has come out of Austin.
Yeah, it's the excuse me, the waste recycling product.
Yeah,
out of
it's
Austin.
Trees and
municipal solid waste.
Solid waste, yeah. And so what they recommend is that you put out an inch every 3 months, I think is what it was.
Okay. Ooh,
we found out in Dr. Tony Probin through the soil testing laboratory and through research that was conducted through them, that we're talking about 1/8 of an inch per year is sufficient. for all your nutrients.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so, it's easy to kind of get an estimate that I'm putting out an inch, but whenever you're trying to talk about 1/8 of an inch,
Good luck
we're
with
going
that.
to put out an inch, aren't
Yeah,
we?
that's right. But I know home gardeners, we're all into recycling, and my goodness, I'm a leaf thief. I mean, if they're on the curbside, they're in my truck and they're coming home with me. In fact, my daughter took my truck to college when I lived in Houston. And so I was left with a Toyota Corolla. And I have a picture. I wish I could show it on the radio, but you can put 13 bags of leaves in and on a Toyota Corolla.
Good Lord.
First you open the trunk and you put 2 in the bottom, and that holds the lid at an angle so you can start stacking leaves over the top of the vehicle anyway.
Oh, my.
But you mentioned Dillo Dirt. I have to tell my favorite Dillo Dirt story. I had my ag agent co-worker over in Travis County when I was there. He thought that they missed the mark. They should have put on Dillo Dirt, "There's a little of you in every bag." They thought it was funny, but they didn't change. Also, we'll go here anyway.
Yeah.
I've often heard that if I'm wondering if I should say something, the answer is always no. But I met the folks that sell Milorganite, which is Milwaukee, Wisconsin sewage
Same thing.
sludge. So they call it Milorganite. Mill is in Milwaukee, Organite is in Don't Ask. Or that's not fair, but and I told the guy, I said, you have missed the marketing thing. Instead of these bag colors you've used, you need to put it in red, white, and blue bags, and you need to call your product Yankee Doodle. And he did not think that was funny at all. I thought it was hilarious. So that just
That didn't go over either.
enough jokes along that line for now. Well, Sam, it has been wonderful having you here today. I always learn something from you, and being able to draw kind of from your experience and wisdom and learning over the years is valuable, and I know it has been to a lot of the folks that are listening in today.
Well, I hope so, and I think, again, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, it's a valuable opportunity. So remember, the most important thing you do if you want a lawn, if you want beautiful flowers or bountiful vegetables, is first spend $1 on your soil and then worry about spending $1 on your plants.
You've been listening to Garden Success with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter. Join us again next week as Skip discusses your questions about gardening and landscaping in the Brazos Valley.